In this video, we want to talk about the rise of agricultural societies. For 99.9% of human history, man lived as a hunter-gatherer. They hunted the animals that were around them with simple tools such as bows and spears. They gathered fruits, they gathered vegetables that were around. There was no planning, there was no understanding of why these things were growing, they just were, and that's what they gathered. Around 12,000 BC, though, we begin to see this transition to rudimentary farming. By rudimentary, we're talking about dig a hole, drop a seed in there. We're not talking about the selective growth yet of certain crops, trying to make them bigger and things of this nature. So why did they become farmers? Why did they move away from this hunter-gatherer society? And really, we were looking at three primary reasons. The first is climate change. Around 15,000 BC to 12,000 BC, the last ice age begins to end. Ice begins to recede as the temperatures rise, and this causes the global sea levels to increase. As those sea levels increase, it takes up a lot of the coastal areas around the world and eliminates the amount of land that's available. So you actually see a reduction in livable land during this time period. At the same time, there's also a population growth. And the thing about the population growth is it kind of works in a cyclical manner. As hunters get better at hunting, they're able to collect more food so they can feed people more easily. Now, this causes two things. One is it causes people to live longer. Two, it causes people to have more children. So the population is expanding. Well, at the same time that population expands, it also causes these hunter-gatherers to have to feed more people, which means they have to do more hunting. And that leads us into this third reason with technological innovation. The simple fact that they needed to hunt more meant that they found better ways to hunt the animals in terms of technology, but also in terms of their thought process. Cornering mammals along a cliff as opposed to trying to hunt, things of this nature. What we see during this time period is that the hunters become extremely efficient at the killing of these large mammals, saber-toothed cats, woolly mammoths, for example. We see the disappearance of those large land mammals during this time period because of overhunting and other factors. But because of that, our biggest issue here is we have all of these people that are now living on the land, and there's simply not enough food to feed them all. So they only have two things they can really do. Either A, they find a way to feed more people, or B, they've got to reduce the population. Now, when we talk about agricultural societies, roughly around 9,000 to 7,000 BC, we begin to see settlements develop specifically designed for farming. The thing about farming as opposed to hunter-gatherers is farmers were in a permanent location. They stayed in that area, they built that area up, and they continued to farm it. When we look at this map here, we see this green area called the Fertile Crescent. And the question becomes, why did people settle there? Well, you'll notice that the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers are located right there. Those two rivers in that area are extremely fertile. Today, that's present-day Iraq, and you wouldn't think of it as being fertile. But then again, we're talking about 11,000 years ago. So there's a vast difference in climate change and geography over the time of those 11,000 years. At the time, those two rivers regularly flooded, which refreshed the soil, which meant that there wasn't soil exhaustion, there wasn't the need to move away from the area. So this is why they settle in this area, because the food grows very, very easily, and there's this constant refreshing of the soil through the flooding of these rivers on a regular occasion. So these agricultural societies, they focused on two things, plant and animal domestication. One of the things we see is, and you can see from this picture here with the Egyptians, is the use of animals as a part of the planting, the development of the plow as societies become more complex. And you can see the importance here in the second picture of the animals, but also of the trade that's taking place. So as societies are producing more food, one of the key aspects to this is not every person has to become a farmer. People can do other things. As people begin to do other things, there's a trade that develops. And you can see from these pictures with the Egyptians the different trading methods and movement of goods. And this is what's going to happen. For example, you got 1,000 people. You need 800 to farm. What do the other 200 do? Well, they're making jewelry, they're doing other things, they're making pottery, and this stuff becomes tradable so that people specialize in other areas. And this is kind of what we end up seeing. We have these permanent settlements developing in the valley, in the Fertile Crescent area, in that area. As those permanent settlements develop, they're going to, early on we're talking small areas. The Jericho, is one of the oldest cities on the planet. And as these cities develop, what we begin to see with this is private ownership. As farmers value that land, they begin to take control of it. Hunter-gatherers never had any ownership. But as you begin this agricultural society, we see this private ownership of land, which naturally leads to social inequality because some people have more than others. Those who don't have enough, they of course want more. This also leads us into social classes. And as you begin to develop social classes, you see governance because those with the most land are those with the most power. And they want to control the resources and control society, so they develop these early governments, which of course are eventually what we would call kings, but at the time they would have been the eldest male, the clan leaders. But these individuals become kings, and eventually, of course, they become emperors, as we see in Egypt. And they're more than just farmers. They're artisans, they're politicians, they're soldiers. In other words, social classes develop in terms of economics, but social classes also develop in terms of how people are viewed in society. Groups are artists, groups are politicians, groups are soldiers. They have these very specific roles. So there's a status involved, and then there's a role that comes with that status. And as a result, we see this flourishing of complex society. Egypt is the best known of these. Mesopotamia, we see the development of writing. This tablet here has the first form of writing called cuneiform on it. It was used to help with trade. And it's happening in different places and at different times. It happens in Egypt, it happens in Mesopotamia, it happens in China, and it happens in the New World in South America and in Central America. At the same time, though, in all of these places where society and this farming is beginning to develop, all of them develop the same basic institutions to fulfill the basic needs of the people. And this is what we call the Neolithic Revolution.